Hello everyone and welcome back. In this lesson we're going to be adding the lesson entity to our application. So we're going to be building a file very similar to this one. It's going to be called the lesson reducers file. This lesson reducers file could also be generated by Schematics. So if we head over to the terminal, we could generate all the necessary code linked to a new entity by running a command similar to this one. This is an NgRx schematics command. We are going to generate here a new NgRx entity with name lesson linked to the courses module. This command, however, generates a lot of code that we won't be using. So in the particular case of our application, it's going to be easier to write our reducer by hand. Let's quickly have a look at the output of the command because this might be useful in your particular application. So switching here to the version control view, we're going to see that we have here several new files. We have here, for example, an actions file. We have here a new model class that was generated. We won't be using this file because we already have defined in our code a lesson entity with all its properties. We have here a list of actions. So as you can see, there are several actions that were defined automatically. The enum was created, we have here the action classes, and we have here the union type containing all the actions. So we can see that each action is going to correspond to one particular operation made using the adapter, the NgRx entity adapter, over the lesson collection. If we switch over here to the reducer file that was generated, this is something very similar to what we want to create. We have here a reducer, we have here the store state defined, we have an adapter, and we have the reducer initial state. And we have here all the case blocks for all the actions that were generated. The problem with these generated files that we have here is that in the end we won't be using much of the code that got generated. We are only going to be using a small part of it. For example, we won't be using any of these case clauses that we have here. So because we won't be able to use much of the code that got generated, we are going to instead implement this entity step by step ourselves instead of relying on the output of this schematics command. This is also helpful for learning purposes. As you can see, the output of ngGenerate entity might be useful as an example, so you might want to use it in your application. Here we have reverted the output of the schematic and we are going to instead implement the lesson entity ourselves. Let's then start by defining our reducer function. We're going to go here to the courses folder and we're going to define a new file called lessons.reducers.ts. So this file is going to contain several of the definitions associated to this new NgRx entity. The first thing that we start by doing is by defining here the state associated to these entities. So this is going to be called the lessons state. Just like the case of the courses state, this is going to extend the NgRx entity state class. This takes one parametric type with the type of the data inside the collection, which is going to be of type lesson. Now what we need to do is to define an adapter for this entity. So the definition is going to be very similar to what we have here in the course reducers file. Let's then take this line that is creating a course adapter and we're going to copy it to our lessons reducer and define a lesson adapter instead. With this we can go ahead and define the signature of our reducer function. Let's call it lessons reducer and let's give it the usual signature of a reducer function. So the first argument is going to be the current state, the second argument is going to be the action that is going to be of type course actions, so we are using only one set of actions for the whole course module, and the output is going to be of type lesson state. So this state here that we have just defined. Now we are going to add here the initial state to our reducer. We are going to, for that, need here an auxiliary variable. We are going to call it initial lesson state, and we are going to define this initial lesson state by using the adapter, using adapter get initial state. Let's then pass this here as the default argument here of the state parameter, and we're going to go ahead and specify here the skeleton for this reducer function. Just like before, we're going to switch here on the action type, and we're going to add here a default case clause. This default case clause is going to return the unmodified state as usual. Now the last part of our reducer file is going to be the definition here of our NgRx entity selectors, and this is exactly identical to what we have here in our course reducers file. Let's then copy the definitions of our selectors, and we're going to paste it here to the bottom of our lesson reducers. Now that we have defined our reducer function, we can go ahead and plug it into our course module. We're going to add here a new feature state. For that, let's switch here to the courses module, and the same way that we have added here using the for feature call, we have added here a feature state under the property courses. Let's then go ahead and do something similar for the lesson state. We are going to call store module for feature, and we're going to configure how the state containing the lessons is going to be stored. We are going to put all the lesson state under the lessons property, and we're going to say that this state is managed here by the lessons reducer. So as we can see, an Angular feature module, such as for example the courses module, can have as many NgRx feature states as we need. In this case, we are adding two feature states containing the courses and the lessons to a singular Angular feature module, which is the courses module, which is being lazy loaded in our application. This is now a great moment to test the code that we already have in place. We are going to switch here to a larger screen, and we're going to log into our application. Now notice one thing, we have loaded this application and we have accessed here the login route. So at this point our application has only loaded the root module and not the lazy loaded course module, and we can see that here at the level of the state. So in the state of our store we only have the router state and the authentication state, and as we can see the user is currently logged out. Now whenever we log into the application we should see here two new feature states show up linked to the courses module. So our reducer functions are going to be lazy loaded as well, together with the rest of the module. Let's go ahead and hit the login button, and as we can see we are now here on the courses page, and we have here two new feature states. We have here the courses state that we have populated before, and we have here a new empty feature state, the lesson state. As we can see, everything is working as expected, which confirms that our initial setup of the lessons entity is correct. We are now ready to implement the logic that will load the first page of lessons data into the store.